What's going on, everybody? Welcome to this episode of Canucks Conversation for Friday, October 25th. Joined now by Harman Dial. I'm actually kind of excited to be here today with you. On the couch, just a couple guys in black hoodies.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. Quads and I have been twinning forever, and two brown guys both wearing black hoodies. I'm glad that your dark pants are at least more of a gray wash than a black. I'm also glad your hoodie has that like white triangle, so
Yes,
it distinguishes.
and I'm wearing a hat.
And you're wearing a hat. Otherwise, it would have been like if it was no hat and it was just a plain black hoodie, it would have been a little bit too much.
Let's just say it was really easy for Jacob to light us today.
Well,
So-
that's like I was joking about it beforehand because sometimes before the show starts, we're testing out the lighting, and I'll say to Jacob that, hey, like I look a little bit dark, and he'll try and like turn up the lights a little bit, but then Quads, as a consequence of that, he'll look way too bright,
Yeah.
and it's like a balancing act. Because we're so different, but yeah, lighting easy today with a couple brown guys.
Lighting is definitely easy. Today's episode of Canucks Conversation brought to you by Greta. Greta's a great spot for all the games, home and away. We'll be there for Canucks Army viewing parties throughout the season, minutes from the arena. Come by before and after the game or whenever you want, whatever you're downtown for. Weekly drink specials, Greta Bar YVR is the place to be, 50 West Cordova Street. Let the games begin. Let's talk about, I don't think it was games that happened, but the last 48 hours have been quite interesting surrounding the Vancouver Canucks. Elias Pettersson, JT Miller, obviously the scuffle heard around the hockey world. It's now making national headlines. Elliot Friedman going on his podcast, 32 Thoughts, and saying what he did today about Elias Pettersson and the whole situation. I just kind of want to talk about it a little bit in a sense where I'm not entirely sure that this is a message from Canucks management down to JT Miller going to Elias Pettersson and saying that, he needs some tough love or things like that. Like, I think you and I can both sit here, Harm, and agree that, Jim Rutherford's not calling Patrick Alvin, who's telling JT Miller to cross-check Elias Pettersson at any point necessary.
Yeah, and for anybody that's not aware of the context, Elliot Friedman's 32 Thoughts podcast dropped today, and he spent a lot of time talking about the whole Pettersson situation. And I don't want to paraphrase, but you should go listen if you're a Canucks fan. A lot of good insight and nuggets into that, and that's kind of reignited the conversation. I don't think we want to focus really at all on the PD Miller scuffle or whatever it was. I think we agree it's both a nothing burger. But the big picture conversation around Pettersson is still interesting from even an on-ice perspective, and not to pile on a guy at a time when the team's still winning, still getting results, but just because he's still the center of attention, and there are things, both positive and negative, that are sort of worth discussing, big picture, and as far as the consequences it's going to have on the Canucks season this year.
Yeah, I mean, look, Elias Pettersson, 39 games since he signed his contract on March 2nd. Everyone knows 8 years, $92.8 million deal. So since March 2nd, there's 39 games he's played, including the playoffs, has just 6 goals. I think the fans obviously are demanding more. With big money comes obviously some responsibility and added pressure. And I think this goes back into the playoffs last season. You hear stories about what happens and things that go on. Elias Pettersson and, teammates talked to him then, not at a rink setting, away from the rink, about his game, about if there was something that they could do to try and elevate his game to another level. I think much of the same has happened this season as well, very early in this season, to try and get Elias Pettersson going. We're only 6 games into the season, or a few games into this season, and obviously he hasn't scored yet, and then you hear everything that's happening with JT Miller and all of that. So his teammates are trying to make him better. I think that that's one of the things that we all need to understand here. Yes, the story of him and JT Miller, and JT, being interviewed, I think it was by Ian McIntyre last year, saying that, we're not BFFs by any stretch of the imagination, but we've come a long way. I don't think that there's this ongoing feud between the two players. They obviously play for the team, but yeah, you can not like each other. Teams have won Stanley Cups with guys that could barely be in the same room with each other. So that's just how it is here. Maybe they don't get along, and that's totally fine, but I don't think JT Miller is actively going out and trying to cross-check Elias Pettersson or being told there was given a message or anything like that. So I think we can start with that there. I want to ask you, Harm. I think when I look at it, and just from body language, looking at games, even in the playoffs last year, Do you think that, or do you feel like Elias Pettersson feels that he's an important part of this organization?
He should.
Yeah.
Right? He's the highest paid player on the team, and the extension last year, when you're committing that type of term in dollars to a player, it's actions speak louder than words, and that should be proof enough. Now, it wouldn't surprise me if in the past, I know other people behind the scenes have kind of speculated about this sort of thing. In the past, has he always felt like he's been seen as the guy by this franchise? Like, I don't know. I go back to, for example, coming off of his entry-level contract. If you will recall, Quinn got the long-term deal, and Pettersson was bridged. Now, I think a lot of us at the time maybe thought, well, just based on cap space, maybe they could only really afford to go long-term on one of these guys, and that's what sort of propelled that decision. But I know, and having spoken to Canucks management at the time, people who were very, very closely involved in that negotiation, that part of it was also just that the Canucks weren't fully sold on going long-term on Pettersson yet. They felt more confident. Like, that was their preference. The Canucks is to go shorter.
Yeah.
And so at a time like that, you can imagine how PD maybe in that situation looks at that and goes, well, we should be seen as equals. One of these guys, Quinn's getting a long-term extension, and I, like, the team wants to bridge me instead. Like, I can imagine him, maybe not perceiving that the best way at the time. Also, little things like, I know it's always meant a lot, going back to Travis Green, Bruce Boudreau, right? Like, through every coach, he's always wanted to be the guy that goes up against McDavid or goes up against Matthews or McKinnon. And he's never really been tapped for that assignment, right? Again, going back to Green, Boudreau, Tocchet, it's usually been JT. Now, and having said all that, again, look at how much he's paid. Look at how much this franchise has invested in him. I don't think that really should factor into this at all. But maybe there is a bit of history with that. But again, I think it's probably best to also just at this point, there's also a lot to just unpack from the on-ice perspective at this point too.
Yeah. Well, I think that it begs another question as well. Like, was he going through something? He said at the last event, at the end of last season, he was battling through injury. Now, obviously, knee tendonitis, I think that's what he said it was. I think that there could be something else going on. There's a reason why, we look at his play, and you mentioned the on-the-ice stuff. The player that was there in his rookie year, every time he got the puck, you and I can agree, I'm sure a lot of people watching this stream can agree, we were probably on the edge of our seats waiting for him to do something. Now, that player, it's night and day, Harm. And it really is. And I think that, when you look at it from an on-ice perspective, strictly production and the way that he plays the game, it's really two different players.
Yeah, so I think the last 2 or 3 games, he's definitely trending in the right direction.
Yeah.
And I'll sort of, I wrote an article yesterday over at The Athletic, just explaining what I'm seeing from him right now, like watching his shifts closely. The positives, right? He's got points in back-to-back games. I think his playmaking and the elite IQ, like, I'm seeing signs of life of that again.
Yep.
Right? I think about his first shift of the game against Chicago. He had the puck down low. He stayed on his feet and threw a reverse hit on Athanasiou, which is huge because he's been falling over a lot in those types of situations where he's taking contact. So stayed on his feet, made the play back to the point. Then he found open ice around the slot to make sure that he was in a lane where Connor Garland, who eventually ended up with the puck, could feed him in the slot. And then once PD got the puck in the slot, gorgeous one-touch pass to Höglander to the back door, which should have been an assist like 7 times out of 10 if it wasn't for Mrazek's miraculous save. But also other moments, like off the rush, he had an east-west pass to Miller, was perfectly able to thread the needle. Miller tried to go one touch for a tic-tac-toe play back to Höglander on the back door. That was nearly an assist. He had a pass through Connor Murphy's legs to set up Philip Hronek right in front of the net. Hronek got poke-checked, but that's setting up a grade A scoring chance. He drew a penalty, I believe it was, in the third period, which I can't fully recall, but I think they ended up scoring on that ensuing power play. And even on the Miller goal, on the man advantage, PD didn't pick up an assist, but he won the battle in front of the net after the initial shot to keep the possession alive so that it wasn't a clearance. And now the Canucks are having to go back 200 feet. So I'm seeing him trend in the right direction as far as what's that next step look like for him. I think, like you mentioned, the biggest thing that stands out is he doesn't have that killer instinct with a shot right now. Like, again, go back to, it was actually pretty jarring a week ago, I went back and looked at some of his rookie season highlights, and as soon as he would get the puck with the smallest window of daylight in the slot,
Yeah.
the way that he could rip it and not just beat goaltenders, but hunt that spot right above the goalie's shoulder.
Yep.
And just consistently go bar down. He was a stone cold killer. And I think that's what has been missing lately. Or like even the one-timers on the power play, like it doesn't feel like his shot has the same level of
Velocity.
Yeah. or even just, I remember at times after his rookie season or even into a sophomore year where his shot commanded so much respect that it would open up space for Bo in the bumper. Like Horvat was this team's leading goal scorer from the bumper, and one of the things I used to talk a lot about is, well, Bo has more space in the bumper because there's usually one PKer who has to kind of shadow Pettersson for a shot, and now that's not really the case anymore. And with the new look power play, he's spending more time in and around the bumper slot, in and around like net front presence. So we'll see how that evolves. And then, so that's the biggest thing that stands out as far as like what does that next step look like for him to truly break out. And then the other element is just like the dynamic play driving, which, yes, he's looked better in the last 2-3 games. That's a really promising sign. But he's also on a line with Connor Garland, who's been the best forward, and he's still doing a lot of like Garland is to drive that line.
Yeah, well, I think that's the biggest thing. The Canucks have given Elias Pettersson really everything that he's wanted since March 2nd. You know, he got the big deal. Yeah. He lost his line mates that weren't very good, that were anchors, for lack of a better word, for him. You get Jake DeBrusk, not even playing with him really right now, and then you get your friend in Daniel Sprong. We'll spend some time on him a little bit later, and he's not even in the lineup. So I think now, you know, just moving this forward, I don't want to talk about the JT Miller versus Elias Pettersson story because I really don't think that there is a big deal, but it's about how he's going to evolve as a player. And when you look at it straight from the facts, like you mentioned, the last couple of games, he has gotten better. He is trending in the right direction, but he still doesn't have that shot. He still doesn't have that killer instinct. So killer instinct, yeah, it's a mindset thing. Shot and other things, then you can start to look at other avenues where things might be bothering him, whether it's the knee, whether it's a wrist, whether something else. So that could be something to keep an eye on with this player. But again, like I said, I don't want to spend an hour of this show talking about Elias Pettersson and JT Miller. This is a Canucks conversation, and obviously we want to talk about the whole team. So moving forward, you know,
one positive that I wanted to bring up, which I think is important context. You mentioned those numbers about the last 39 games.
Yep.
I think it's worth remembering that we've seen him look completely lost in the past and then find that elite superstar form again, right? This isn't like the first time this has happened, and it's like we've seen him in not the same spot because I think the circumstances and the way it looked was different, but we've seen him bounce back from not just a slump, but a brutal stretch of extended hockey where the 2021-22 season, which was the end of Travis Green's tenure, it bleeded into the start of Bruce Boudreau getting hired. Elias Pettersson had 6 goals and 17 points in 37 games. And if you remember, he looked so lost. A lot of the things that we were mentioning as far as lacking that confidence, that shot not being there, we had those concerns at the time too. And after those 37 games at the start of that season, he closed the year out with 26 goals in 43 games, which is a 50-goal pace. And the season after, he had the best year of his career, scoring 102 points. So that's at least a glimmer of hope and a reminder that, okay, it doesn't guarantee that he's immediately going to find the superstar level again, but it at least provides some optimism that, okay, he's been through these deep extended struggles before and he's found his way out of it. So hopefully he can find a way to do it again. Yeah, I mean, he's not getting a coaching change, so he's not going to get the coach bump, right, of something else there. But, yeah, you hope that he does find it. You hope that this trend in the right direction. I know it's small baby steps and we're picking at it, but until he scores and until he starts to score at his elite level that we all know that he can do, I think we're still going to – the conversation is still there because now it's become a national story, right, because of how much money he makes and because of how important and where – he was earlier in his career. I did mention that I want to continue this conversation, but first, you heard the Whitecaps? They had a pretty big win a little while ago. 5-0 over the Portland Timbers. They're now into the playoffs. A historic wild card match in Portland for Vancouver as they put 5 past the Portland Timbers in what was a dominant display
to secure their spot in round 1 of the best-of-3 series in the 2024 MLS Cup playoffs. The Caps now get set for a rematch against LAFC. That team is good. Starting this Sunday, October 27th at BMO Stadium. Kickoff at 6:45 p.m. Pacific time for free on MLS Season Pass on Apple TV and available to listen at whitecapsfc.com. BC Place here in Vancouver hosting the match a week later, November 3rd at 5:45 p.m. Tickets for this match on sale now at the link in our episode description or go to ticketmaster.ca/Whitecaps. Dakota Joshua, Harm. He's another guy that, I think before we even started this, more kind of referred to as a glue guy. He can play with anyone. Everyone likes him around the team and in the locker room. He is nearing his return. And I think that a lot of the things that we look at is a very important thing for Rick Tocchet to be able to have him come back into the lineup.
Yeah, so many elements, right? How heavy he is along the walls, the battles that he's able to win. And towards the end of last season, we saw his role really evolve and grow to where he was on the ice for basically last 2 minutes of the game in the third period. And defensive zone situation, they wanted Joshua out there because he could be trusted defensively. He was growing as a penalty killer, even as a net front presence at times. In 6-on-5 situations, I remember a couple of occasions where he was deployed in that context. And I imagine whenever he returns and is fully comfortable and fully up to speed and has the confidence of his offensive skill set back, that he'll be a prominent part of the second unit power play in that net front capacity. So it's just a question of, we know how good he can be in a middle six role, but since he's missed training camp, preseason, the start of the actual campaign and meaningful games, how long is it going to take him to get back up to speed and be that impactful player that we know he can be when he's 100%? That's always the biggest question mark. And really, whenever he does return, I'm going to be looking at a couple of areas to get an indicator of, okay, is this going to be a quick get back up to speed for Joshua, and we're going to be talking about him looking like the best version of himself really, really quickly, or is it going to take him, some games, some weeks, maybe even a month or two to be the player that he was last year? One is just the quickness on the forecheck, because there are times when I remember early last season, around the time when he got scratched for that game against San Jose in early November, one of the issues with him then was just the quickness on the forecheck. It felt like he was maybe half a step behind, and that half step makes all the difference in the world between whether you're able to tie a guy up and create havoc or whether you're just like too late and it's an easy breakout for the other team.
That was before Rick Tocchet called him out, right? I think when he's healthy scratched him, he did call him out.
It was around the same time.
Yeah. And then obviously Joshua turned around his season after that. But yeah, no, I think that he's an important piece to this team. I think that obviously, coming back from what he's come back from, it's all about, managing pain and being able to do those types of things and get into different areas of the game that makes him so, made Dakota Joshua so effective for the Vancouver Canucks. It actually brings us to our poll question here, powered by Square. Time now for our poll question. If you run a restaurant, you're too busy for this ad. You're thinking about how to get more orders flowing and new locations opening. You need to get more customers, keep them coming back. So really, you're already thinking about Square, because Square Restaurant Tech helps more than 400,000 restaurants do all those things and more. So when you're thinking about a restaurant, think bigger and think Square. Go to square.ca and see why Square is big in restaurants. Dakota Joshua is a big part of this team, put up some big numbers last season with the Vancouver Canucks. Brings us to our poll question here, Harm. What is the realistic expectation for Dakota Joshua this season when he makes his return? 18 goals in 63 games last year. Your choices are 15 goals, 20 goals, or 25 goal scorers. What do you think?
I'm around the 15 goal range.
Yep.
He was riding a red hot shooting percentage last year, which will probably regress. Now, you can offset a dip in your shooting percentage with him just earning a bigger role, because earlier in the season, his minutes weren't as high. They started to climb towards the end of the season, and part of that could also be offset by, if he's playing a role, more consistent role on PP2, which he didn't really have last year, he's going to have more of an offensive opportunity to produce. But yeah, I'm going to temper expectations. I'm not going to expect him to immediately enter this lineup and be be the player that he was when he was on a line with Garland and they were one of the best third lines in the NHL. Like maybe he is that right away, but I always tend to play things a bit more cautiously and temper my expectations, and so I'm leaning more towards the 15-goal range.
Where do you think Rick Tocchet is going to deploy him? Because the way that Connor Garland's playing, I don't think you can move him off playing with Elias Pettersson. And the way that third line has been going for the Vancouver Canucks of late, I don't think you can change that third line either. So it's a good problem to have for Rick Tocchet because you have a player that's so effective coming back to the lineup, but it's also a problem that you need to try and insert him into.
Yeah, along those lines of having tempered expectations, I would want to ease him in.
Yeah.
Right? Like he doesn't need to immediately hop back into the lineup and be playing 15, 16 minutes a night. Have him an opportunity to, like, I would initially, because of how well that Bluger line has played the last couple of games, Heinen picks up a couple of goals. Like, I know we're not talking about Joshua actually entering the lineup like within the next few games.
No, but he's starting to get
contact.
back to practice and things
of course,
like that.
yeah. Now, if I had to make that decision for, pretty soon here, I would lean towards the fourth line. Like, why not just like have him, start to get his feet under him? And the beauty of that is if he looks great in that role, you can find an opportunity to bump him up the lineup. How many opportunities are there in a game where maybe a certain line isn't going, and even if it's just a temporary in-game adjustment, you hit the line blender and you move guys into different spots. Like, even think about the first game of the season, right? When the line combinations weren't really working and Tocchet went, all right, I've got Kiefer Sherwood on my fourth line. I'm just going to bump him up and he's going to play more minutes. He's going to be double shifted. He's going to get occasional top six opportunities. So I wouldn't mind easing him into a fourth line role. And I think big picture, he's probably, I would imagine at some point, assuming Heinen just keeps clicking and keeps humming now that he's picked up a couple goals, but I'd assume at some point that he would move ahead of Heinen on the left wing depth chart, and that maybe you were looking at a Joshua, Bluger, Sherwood third line, which really excites me.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think that's when they acquired Kiefer Sherwood, I think that's what they had in mind, that's the type of line that they need going into the playoffs. That's what they needed. That's what they lacked. Other than the top two, especially if you're going to make a long postseason run, you're going to need your third and fourth lines to go ahead and contribute there in the postseason. When you look at a guy like Jake DeBrusk, we haven't even brought his name up yet. We'll go through a couple more players as well because I want to hear your take on, obviously, Daniel Sprong and what you saw from practice as well. But very quickly, Jake DeBrusk, when you look at him, and obviously we know he can put the puck in the net. He's obviously got paid like it, as a free agent coming here in Vancouver. Where do you think his best fit is on this team?
I still think they're finding it, right? There isn't one that's immediately come to mind. I like the idea of him getting an extended look with Miller and Besser just because Höglander and Garland have meshed with Pettersson. And to me, DeBrusk has to be with one of the top six centers, right? They experimented with one game of having him with Teddy Bluger, and as much as I like Teddy Bluger, I don't want to see Jake DeBrusk and Teddy Bluger together. I don't think that's going to maximize DeBrusk's chances of being a productive scorer. I think he needs a playmaking center with him because DeBrusk is more of a straight lines type of guy. He can forecheck, he can finish around the net, he can do a little bit of damage off the rush. And so I think they've got him in the right spot right now to try and build some chemistry with JT and Brock. They're going to get a ton of offensive opportunities. They're also going to get a lot of defensive responsibilities. Like Pittsburgh's going to be in town on Saturday, and I bet you that Miller line is going to draw the Sidney Crosby assignment. And I think DeBrusk has the two-way chops and defensive responsibility to where he can hold up his end of the bargain in that type of role. So I think they've got him in the right spot there. Of course, wasn't really a fit for him on Power Play 1, and this is, I think, going to be an evolving storyline. Is still trying to find the right fourth forward to round out that unit. It was a struggle. It's really been a struggle for them ever since they traded Bo. Is like, who's going to be the solution there? They've got Garland on that unit right now. Obviously, down the stretch in the playoffs last year, at times it was Garland, at times it was Lindholm. They never really found that perfect fit. The issue, I think, with Garland, and look, I don't mind him getting an opportunity there because DeBrusk, I think it's still going to be a work in progress for him to figure out the bumper spot. But with Garland, he does a lot of things well, but his lack of a shot threat, I just don't think penalty killers respect that as like a real weapon from the flank.
Well, they don't. I mean, and it's evident. Like, they let him wind up because they know, A, he's never going to take the shot, and B, when he does take the shot, it's not that effective. Connor Garland is most effective when he's getting under the skin in those dirty areas where, that's where he gets a lot of his goals, right? And, he's not the best shooter of the puck. He's not going to, get you goals with a booming slap shot or things like that. But for him to be effective on the power play, it's getting into those areas where he can maybe also try and draw on other penalties, right? Brock Besser had 16 goals last season kind of playing that role on the power play, where it was in those areas, where it was finding those different places to score. So I think the Canucks have to try and find a way. But I agree with you. I do totally think it's going to be an evolving thing. And I think in short order, you're probably going to see a guy like Jake DeBrusk back up there because they're going to have to figure it out themselves.
Yeah, I also think part of because they sort of did an informal, I was at practice over at UBC today, and it wasn't an official power play practice, but JT and Garland were spending a lot of time, I think, trying to become comfortable and just doing extra work. Like JT, a lot of just one-on-one conversations with Tocchet and Yogi Svechkovsky in relation to becoming more comfortable making plays from the right flank. And I think that's also like a little bit of a window into a bit of a side tangent, but what makes JT so great is how well prepared he is. He was on the ice so long that it was just him and Garland and the players that are like the Archie Baines, Daniel Sprong type guys, Nils Oman, who are like on the fringes.
Yeah.
And the level of work and thought that JT was putting into putting himself into different spots of the ice and trying to understand handedness of if I have the puck in this spot and there's a right shot player here, what should my read be? And having those conversations with the coaching staff, it's no wonder why the power play runs through him, given how much work and thought and prep that he puts into I take pride in running the power play and being well prepared for this. Now, Garland was spending a lot of time early on working on when the puck gets rimmed around.
Yep.
As a flank player, you've got to be able to really quickly settle it and make a quick play. He spent a lot of time just Krogh. Is Jason his first name?
Yes, I think so.
I didn't want to fumble it. Was rimming a lot of pucks around. And Garland was working on just becoming more comfortable with those rimmed pucks on the power play. And there were times where I think for Garland to have success on the power play, it's not, especially as a flank player, it's going to have to be more of a movement type thing with the entire unit and being interchangeable, because that's one thing Garland is good at, is moving off the puck, finding sneaky ways to get open, but that only works if the other players are also moving. And I think that's I asked JT after practice about getting comfortable with that right side on the power play and just the new look overall. And he emphasized that we want to be a unit that moves around more, and just even between the net front and the bumper guy, just having guys move around a lot. I think that type of movement-based environment is going to be what Garland needs to be successful in that first unit.
What else you noticed from practice today?
It was interesting. Towards the end of it, Daniel Sprong, he was on the further end of the ice, on really late, and had a really extended conversation one-on-one with Rick Tocchet. And I think part of their conversation, again, I can hear what what they were saying, but just based off of what Tocchet seemed to be teaching, seemed to be some discussions around defensive zone, positioning and assignments. And I think it seemed like the type of chat where, I don't know, I've been I don't know this, we're not going to have any clear idea of this until morning skate tomorrow, but it seemed I've been following practices for 5-6 seasons now. It seemed like the type of conversation you have with between a player and coach when a player is likely to sit again. Now, I don't know. Maybe there is still a chance that Sprong draws into the lineup, but that's kind of seemed to be the tone of just the type of conversation they were having, and just seemed like it was a heart-to-heart. So,
yeah, it's interesting because the Daniel Sprong signing, it's Elias Pettersson's friend. It's a guy that scored in this league, but we've gotten the full experience of Daniel Sprong so far. He scores, he makes nice plays, but then he doesn't play more than 2 shifts in the third period in a close game. And I think that's responsibility in your own end. And I think that one of the things that Rick Tocchet and his coaching staff, harp on the most is being responsible two-way player. And it's an unfortunate because you want Daniel Sprong out there, but if Rick Tocchet can't trust you to win a hockey game, in the third period to go out and be responsible in your own end, you're probably not getting into the lineup. So that's another conversation that it's going to be interesting. Like Dakota Joshua is probably, I think Frank Saravalli reported a week, maybe 2 to come back into this lineup. Like, does Dakota Joshua come back or does Daniel Sprong get in the lineup? Like, what happens first? Like, the Canucks are winning right now. If they continue to, if they beat Pittsburgh, he's probably out against Carolina. You win that game Wednesday night against New Jersey. Like, I'm not entirely sure. And then it brings up the 2-week mark for Dakota Joshua. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens here over the next 14 days.
Yeah, it's a really good point, and I sort of lean towards, I think I'll say this. This is I guess maybe important context from the coaching staff's perspective. Tocchet mentioned today that they worked today on practice with trying to clean up some defensive zone coverage.
Yep.
And making it a priority to clean up the defensive side of their game. So I imagine the coaching staff is thinking, well, as a team, we still haven't gotten to where we are defensively. Do I want to complicate things by bringing in a guy who is the weakest forward on our roster when it comes to defensive zone coverage?
Yeah.
Now, I personally look at Sprong and I go, I think the reward of his goal-scoring upside outweighs the risk. But when there's a bigger picture philosophy that you're trying to get the team to buy into, and early on, especially in the first few games, let's be honest, the team's defensive zone coverage was suspect at times.
Yep.
And if you're trying to get the team back on track, you might want to, like, you can understand why a coach might want to take the safer route. I'm not saying I agree with it necessarily, but I think that's a crucial background context to keep in mind. Is I don't think Tocchet is fully happy with where the Canucks are defensively as a team to this standpoint.
When you look at it as well, another guy that is on the defensive end that I wanted to bring up to you as well that helps with the team defense because he's a puck-moving defenseman that makes, I think, Vinny Desharnais better, and that's Erik Brannstrom. What have you liked from his game so far?
His ability to skate
out
of trouble. Like when he's hounded on the forecheck, he's not just glassing out. He's not just panicking. He has the confidence to wheel it around the net, to get his head up and actually look to make a controlled play, which I think, Quads and I talked a lot about it. It brings a different dimension to this bottom four group. Tocchet said today that he feels like Brannstrom has been improving every single game, and he was asked as well, what does Brannstrom need to do to show that he's going to stick into the lineup when Derek Forbort eventually returns to the team? I thought it was interesting that Tocchet brought up how they showed Brannstrom a clip, and this was to highlight a positive example from one of these recent games where a bigger forward was trying to drive the net. Mm-hmm. Brannstrom effectively got on the inside and boxed him out. And they communicated to Brannstrom, like, that's what we need to see you do to stay in the lineup. Like, if you can do that, and you don't need to always be, of course, size helps when it comes to, like, boxing out and tying sticks up. But if you can just, like, learn techniques, how to get underneath guys, understand how to leverage angles, and you can do that right more often than you do wrong, well, that's going to be the key for him to stay in the lineup when Forbort returns. And also, it does sound like the coaching staff is open to the idea of him playing the right side.
Yeah.
Like, that's an option, and that matters, right? Some coaches, they don't like the idea of left-handed defensemen playing the right side. Tocchet seems open to it. He said that he had looked into it, and this is what I really appreciate about Tocchet as a coach, is he's really open-minded. He understands the game in so many different ways. Tactically, he is like a genius. To talk power play about, to talk 5-on-5 play about systems. Like, he can keep up a conversation with the best tacticians around the NHL, but he also understands, like, the old school element, the game within the game, but he's also open to analytics. And he referenced that they went back and looked at the analytics of him playing the right side in Ottawa, and the results were decent. They weren't spectacular, but they were decent. I love that Tocchet has already kind of done the work on that and seems to be open to the idea of Brannstrom playing the right side because based off what people in Ottawa were saying, he genuinely seems comfortable being able to play his offside, and I do think that should be a legit consideration so that he can stick in the lineup.
Yeah, I think Brannstrom's a legit consideration for power play 2 as well. I think that, we talk so much about power play 1 and, them trying to figure out what works there. I really do think that, it's going to be very short order before we see Erik Brannstrom on that second power play unit. I mean, obviously he's going to play against the Pittsburgh Penguins.
Do you follow up on that? Do you imagine that being like two defensemen set with him and Hronek?
I do. I think that's what it's. I think that's what it's going to be. I think they like his mobility back there on the blue line. And he can open up space and create space on that second unit. Now, if the first unit's out there for a minute 45, it really doesn't make a difference. But I do think that balances them out a little bit on the two units, and they really do like him. I mean, there's a reason why they went out and they tried to get him, and he was told that he wasn't going to be in Abbotsford for long. He's an NHL defenseman, right? He played 70-something games for the Ottawa Senators the last couple of seasons, and now he's here trying to prove himself and earn another contract with the Vancouver Canucks. So if he can succeed on that right side, if they do end up moving him over, I think that's a huge positive for him to stay in the lineup. But as you mentioned, the boxing out and showing that clip. You got to show that clip of him boxing out to a guy like Carson Soucy, to other guys on that blue line that haven't been able to go and do that. So, we talked about their defensive issues being pretty suspect this season. Yeah, there's a couple of guys that have definitely, taken the reins on that. But just from a strictly making the team better standpoint, Harm, when you look at it, if Erik Brannstrom is making Vinny Desharnais play better hockey, then he has to be in the lineup. And I think that you look at it from a coaching staff at that point, then the decision becomes, well, if we want to put Forbort back in, he's going to need a little bit of time to practice, and then we'll see what happens. But you probably can't take Erik Brannstrom out.
Yeah, I mean, he can also make Forbort better because Forbort and Desharnais have the same weakness. They're slow and don't really move the puck well, but what they do well is they're big, strong bodies that clear the front of the net and are defensively responsible, and that actually works well. Like, I imagine for the coaching staff, it's comforting knowing that, okay, if we have a smaller guy in Brannstrom that maybe isn't going to be the most authoritative defensive presence, that we can pair him with the tree trunk and have the tree trunk do a lot of the grunt work in terms of breaking up the cycle and cleaning up loose change around the net defensively. I think he would make Derek Forbort better too. And for sure, if he sustains the level that he's shown to this point, like he has to stay in the lineup.
Yeah, and I agree, and I think he will. To be completely honest, I don't think that he's going to come out for quite some time. Let's get to you guys watching. You people that make the show here, get involved in our social channels. Lots of people in the YouTube chat have a lot of questions for you, Harman, on anyone else, as it's presented to you by White Spot. At White Spot, they're all about enjoying great, comforting food and spending quality time with loved ones. With the new Comfort Menu, White Spot's focusing on cozy, satisfying flavors that are perfect to enjoy with family. Available now and developed by the White Spot culinary team, the Comfort Menu is filled with warm, indulgent dishes designed to make you feel right at home. The new menu features mouth-watering new additions like mini Yorkies, the braised beef burger, the home-style pot roast, and backed by popular demand, the iconic chicken pot pie. Bring your family to White Spot for a delicious meal, perfect for the season. Visit your local White Spot today. Lots of people get involved and want to hear from you, Harm. Jeremy Lee, in reference to our poll question, Joshua wasn't intended to score many goals when he was brought in, but it's his hard-nosed style that's earned his spot as a pivotal player on the team. Is that not?
For sure. It's the energy. It's making your lineup harder to play against. It's not just the production that dictates a player's value. I mean, look at Connor Garland, right? He's a player that is way more valuable than his point totals. Like somebody outside of Vancouver that if you look at the point totals for the Canucks last year, they would not understand how big of a role Joshua and Garland played for this team in like driving the bus and dragging the team into the fight on nights where they're just, for whatever reason, the top of the lineup was maybe a little bit flat and needed some energy. He's a player that can not just produce, but help align, control a lot of possession in the offensive zone, be a menace on the forecheck, penalty killing as well. Like that's another area where towards last season, he started to take on a bigger and bigger role, especially when it came to the neutral zone, like forecheck part of the PK. Really smart reads. I didn't know that he had that type of skill set in his arsenal, and him developing in that type of way, like an underrated storyline for why the Canucks found some playoff success is because the PK was really good.
Yep.
And now part of that was, of course, right shot centerman who won a lot of draws in Elias Lindholm. He was huge. But also, like, Joshua was a big part of that. And, of course, Cole and Zadorov were too. But for the Canucks to be successful in the playoffs and hopefully go on a deep run, if if they, of course, have to make it first. But a deep postseason run is going to require them to be on point with their special teams. Last year, the power play was inconsistent, wasn't where it needed to be, but the PK is what allowed them to get to Game 7 of Round 2. Joshua is going to be an important part of making sure that the PK, which, I mean, to this point has been pretty decent, but making sure that against the best power plays in the NHL come playoff time, that the PK isn't just like average or okay, but that, oh, this is a real like top 10 PK. Like that's another storyline where even for Edmonton, like we all focus on McDavid, Draisaitl and the big names and like look how much offense he can produce. One of the concerns that they're going to have to think about and address is in the Stanley Cup final, it wasn't just that their power play was humming. Like they got to the cup final in large part because their PK was above like 90%. Like it was ridiculous. And like they lost some of those guys, like McLeod, like Ceci, who played an important role on the PK. And if you look at why Edmonton has had a slow start in the early going, it's because their PK has been a big problem. So, similar with Joshua and hopefully adding a boost to the Canucks shorthanded performance as well.
Callie Canuck asks, is Sprong getting the koozie treatment this year? Sprong's getting a bit of the Höglander treatment too, right? Because he kind of got it as well in the playoffs where, Rick Tocchet couldn't trust him in certain situations. So he was, moved, he was shelved to the press box there in some situations. But look, I think that he definitely is, in a sense. Kuzmenko scored 37 goals in the National Hockey League. Daniel Sprong has never gotten that high in his career. Do I think that Daniel Sprong can figure it out defensively? You hope at some point he is able to, but as it stands right now, he's going to have to sit and watch and practice, and in order for him to get back in the lineup, I think at least.
But there's also going to be a point in the season where, let's remember, we haven't even escaped October yet.
I agree, but there's so much stuff going on.
But there are going to be injuries that happen. There are going to be, like, this is what I keep coming back to is you'll have decent players like Sprong who end up on the outside looking in, but then you'll get to January, February, March, and it's like in years past, it's like, how is Alex Chason playing with Elias Pettersson right now?
Yeah.
Right? Or like whoever, like insert guy that started in as a fourth line player or like as a 13th forward and now is playing a prominent role. He's going to get an opportunity. Like,
Linus
this is
Karlsson.
Yeah, I mean, like Archie Baines getting top 6 looks when he was first called up. I mean, he's already gotten top 6 looks this season too, but like he got some of that opportunity in the second half of last year. Like Sprong will get his look again. This is a tough part to navigate, and it's especially difficult because there are a lot of healthy bodies right now, and it's going to become more difficult once Joshua comes back. But like they're not going to stay this healthy the entire season. Sprong is going to have opportunities, and perfect example. Go back to playoffs. Like I didn't even need to go back to Alex Chason. Like Game 7. Round 2, you had Phil DiGiuseppe and Ilya Mikheyev in a top 6 role.
Yeah.
Like now, in that type of situation, you may still end up leaning on Daniel Sprong to play top 9 for you. And when your season's on the line, like just because he's in the press box now doesn't mean that he's banished there forever, that there's no pathway for him to succeed here, that he's doomed for failure. He's still going to be a player that factors in at some point and could be an important factor in making sure that the bottom doesn't fall out if and when injuries strike.
I just think right now when you look at it, they're about, stacking wins and getting wins very early in the season. And the team they have right now, doesn't involve Daniel Sprong. But if that top unit power play can't figure it out, he's a guy that's going to go up there and be a guy that I know that they probably won't want to do it, but limited minutes, 5-on-5, but just be a special teams guy. We've seen other teams do it in history. I mean, it doesn't work sometimes, but it might be the case. I know it's a long problem away and a long thing to happen, but could you see something like that even taking place?
Yeah, that's a really good point, right? If Garland doesn't work out here and you're already thinking, well, we gave DeBrusk a shot and aren't really a lot of other natural options out there. I mean, Sprong has, with his shot, like he could be PP1 caliber, at least for a short burst. I mean, might be worth giving a look if, I mean, the power play just scored 2 goals, so it's not really a concern right now.
No.
But if it goes cool at some point, that's an extra option that you could turn to as like well, could this work? Might as well roll the dice.
Yeah. Another Brad, ask anyone we'll switch to the Canucks opponent here for a little bit. Actually, I have one for you on the Penguins as well, but we'll get to this one first. How bad will the Penguins be this year?
Yeah, it's also a bad sign that they haven't been picking up wins, and yet Gino is just going off.
Monster, beast mode.
Like, that's a problem. I think the problem is, like, looking at their back end, and especially just hearing a lot of the chat around Pittsburgh, it sounds like Carlson and Letang have had a really, really brutal start. And so that blue line is going nowhere unless Carlson and Letang are playing at an elite level.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we'll see, but, like, I have a buddy who's who's a Penguins fan, and before the season he was trying to, like, convince me that, like, I think maybe if they can just get their power play back on track, which was, like, near the bottom of the league last year, if they're just league average, like, they could maybe be one of the 3 or 4 teams that's in contention for a wild card spot. But I don't see it. I think they're too old. I think they've got too many question marks, even in net now. Like, seeing everything that's going on with Tristan Jarry, him being a healthy scratch. Like, I don't see it. I don't see them being a playoff team, and I don't think that necessarily means they're going to be, like, in contention for a bottom 5 spot. I don't think they're that bad. I don't think it's possible to be that bad when you've got Sidney Crosby still operating at this level. But I think they're definitely more likely to pick up a top 10 pick this coming June than be in a playoff spot.
I was talking to you before we did this show, before we decided on doing a Joshua poll question, but I wanted to ask you, with in mind that Crosby and Malkin are in town tomorrow night to play the Canucks, when you look at players that are must-see or play people and teams that you want to spend your money on, you want to go watch these games, is it Crosby and Malkin? Is it Ovi? Is it McDavid? But I know Bedard hasn't played here yet, but is it Chicago? Where does that category for you? Like, who's the player or who's the team that you want to go and watch?
I think it's Sid, just because of not like McDavid is so electrifying, and anybody who hasn't had a chance to see him live, like, you have to do it at some point. Like, it's going to be a core memory of mine seeing him just, like, take over Game 2 in Rogers Arena in a playoff game, just like seeing him in Draisaitl go to work. It's like, wow, this is one of the coolest experiences of my career to see this live. But as a divisional rival, like, you see McDavid a lot, and he's also got a lot of runway left in his career. But at this stage, Crosby at 37, look, his game hasn't dropped off, but he's 37 years old. Like, he's not going to be playing forever. You've maybe only got, 2-3 seasons left of him in the league, maybe. And so that makes it extra special, especially because Pittsburgh's out east. He doesn't visit Rogers Arena as much. It's extra special. And I still remember being in the building for the last time that Pittsburgh came, and it was so funny just seeing Pittsburgh as a team, because at the time Malkin was kind of up and down, and he didn't have the best wingers to play with, and Pittsburgh was 2 different teams. Like, the same effect that we kind of have now, where the Canucks are a different team with Quinn Hughes on the ice, and they're like a juggernaut, whereas with any other defense pair, it looks like, oh boy, this is trouble. They're getting caved in. They're getting pounded. It looks like this team is a liability at times. That's how it felt like watching the Penguins last time. Was like, oh my goodness, I bet Mike Sullivan feels like as soon as Crosby's back on the bench, he's got like a timer for when he can put Sid back on there.
There's no one else he could roll out.
It was such a contrast, and he's still so smart, and it's a different level of impact, where with McDavid, with McKinnon, it's like all about that elite level speed, and Crosby, of course, doesn't have the elite speed that he did in his prime, but it's just how smart he is away from the puck, like how he reads the ice, his vision, his two-way habits. It's still so impressive to watch. So, I mean, Sid is still up there for me as number one, as far as, like, I'm excited to see this guy in town.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's the same for me. It was Ovi for a while, and Ovi got his cup, and then now it's just Ovi's kind of just doing his thing now.
Yeah.
The chase to break the goal record, it might take a couple of seasons now. It's just kind of seeing how he started as well. One more. Anyone else before we get to our Bet365 pick? I wanted to bring this one up because I think it's topical. Who do you think the Canucks from Jackson? Who do you think the Canucks would have to give up to get Rasmus Andersson, or what would you be comfortable giving up for him? So I'm going to answer that first. Flames aren't trading him at 5-1-1.
Yeah,
right. The Flames are a
this
good
is what
hockey
I kept trying
team.
to tell Quads.
Yeah,
like,
they're not getting rid of him. The Flames are decent. Rasmus Andersson is like a contender for the Norris Trophy right now. Like, I think when you look at it and how good that he's played and how much he means to that team, so the Flames are going to have all the leverage in the world if they're trying to trade one of their guys, but they're a good hockey team. Like, the Flames and the Jets play on Saturday night, and they're the 2 best teams in Canada, and no one would have thought that coming.
he also just turned 27 a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
Or Or actually, no, he turns 28. My bad. In a couple of days. The point being, he could be their like JT Miller type, where it's like, okay, he's the older part of your like the next wave of your core, and obviously Canucks were able to turn it around a little bit quicker when they had to make the decision of, okay, do we extend him or do we trade him? But they may look at Anderson as like we've already traded away a lot of like the Tanev, Markstrom, Hannafin types. We're gonna want some older veteran players who are building blocks, who can show the young guys the rope, and Anderson has embraced, like, he loves being a Calgary Flame. So they may look at him and just go, like, why would we not just want to keep him? And if they do eventually think of trading him, like, the list of teams that are going to want in on him at that contract price, like, it's going to be a massive bidding war. And there's no way that conversation doesn't start with at least a first-round pick and, like, one of your top, like, a Willander or Lekar-Mackey, which I don't know if you're going to be comfortable getting to that type of range. It's rare that prospects of Willander and Lekar-Mackey's caliber get moved in trades.
Yeah. In
today's NHL, it just doesn't happen. But we're not talking about a rental with Anderson. He's got another year after this left on his contract. It's a really cheap cap hit. I think that makes, again, with this hot start, with Calgary having a stronger negotiating position because of the start that they've had, like, they're like, the ball is fully in their court, and they're going to be able to, given how many teams are in the market for high-end right shot defensemen, they're going to be able to kind of dictate the price they want.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting conversation to have and a season to watch for the Calgary Flames, because a lot of people, myself included, were writing them off as a team that we didn't really know what they were going to be. But you get off to a hot start. You have guys.
Quads and I made a bet.
Yeah, what was it?
So we bet a Pirate Pack. He thinks they're going to make the playoffs.
Okay.
I said no. I'm not believing the playoff hype.
Yeah. When did you make this bet? After a couple games?
Like
2 days ago.
2 days ago.
Okay. Yeah. I don't think they are either. I would take that bet for sure over a Pirate Pack But speaking of betting, look at you. What our transition. Time now for our Bet 365 of the day, presented by Brett 365. I'm going to go back to the ice tonight. We're talking about Sidney Crosby, talk about electrifying players in the National Hockey League. I'm going with the same game parlay here on Bet 365. I like Sid to get a point. I like Connor McDavid to get a point. And I like the Pittsburgh Penguins to come out victorious against the Edmonton Oilers. So I'm not entirely sure. Sometimes I'm not sold on the end part of it, but I do like Sid. I do like Connor McDavid, and I do like the Pittsburgh Penguins tonight for that, as that was our bet of the day, brought to you by Bet365, proud partner of Canucks Conversation. Open an account with Bet365 today and bet on a huge range of markets, whatever the sport, whatever the moment. It's never ordinary at Bet365. Be sure to use code NATION when you sign up for an account.
Quads wanted to make sure that he messaged specially in the group chat to make sure that we gave him the opportunity to take a victory lap.
Yes.
On taking the Blues to beat the Leafs last night, and
that was
convincing.
Just vibes.
It was vibes. It was like Leafs are frauds. Craig Berube back in, not back in town because St. Louis was in town, but and it was a gutsy pick because they just lost Robert Thomas, right?
Yeah.
Without their best player, and Blues still hammered the Leafs. So good on Quads.
And I think he had them at plus 200. So pretty good.
Pretty good.
That's pretty good. That is pretty good. There's been a bunch of them out there. Like, who's going to be the team that beats the Winnipeg Jets? I think the Flames can beat them. I think that's going to be a good game. Like, I think I'd take the Flames tomorrow night against the Jets for sure.
I feel like you're sort of on Quad side here.
Flames over the Jets tomorrow?
Well, no, in general, just like buying.
But
the
if
Flames.
there's going to be one team that beats the Jets right now, it's going to be the Flames.
Maybe, yeah.
I mean, they got
I'm not saying I disagree, but like
I
think you like the Flames.
I do like the Flames. I don't think they're going to make the playoffs, but they're fun. They're like one of those teams where you look at it, they're like, oh, early in the season, off to a good start, they're frisky. Like, by the time Christmas rolls around, the Four Nations break and all that, it's going to be like, okay, come back to reality. And then they're going to be sellers at the deadline.
Yeah, that's
and then
how
we'll have the Rasmus conversation that Jackson wanted us to have a little bit later on in this season. But, Harm, this was fun.
Yeah, this was great.
Yeah, really enjoyed doing this. But Quads is back and will be back, and I'll fill in at some point again in the future. But, yeah, thank you very much for this. And this was Canucks Conversation.
Canucks Conversation is live Monday through Friday, every weekday at 2 p.m. over on the Canucks Army YouTube channel. Make sure you like, subscribe, and interact in the YouTube live chat every day with us, folks.